There are places where history seems to echo through every mountain, every valley, and every ancient stone. The Scottish Highlands are one of those places. For centuries, they have been celebrated as the homeland of fearless warriors, proud clans, and legendary bloodlines whose names still survive today. But what if those names carried a story even older than Scotland itself? For generations, people believed the history of the Highland clans was already written. The tales of clan chiefs, brutal battles, and heroic warriors were passed down through songs, manuscripts, and family traditions. These stories became the foundation of Scottish identity, painting a picture of isolated clans fighting for honor and survival in one of Europe's harshest landscapes. Then something extraordinary happened. Scientists began comparing the DNA of modern Scots with ancient human remains discovered across Scotland, Ireland, and the wider British Isles. Instead of confirming every traditional story, the genetic evidence revealed something far more fascinating. Beneath the famous clan names were traces of migrations that began thousands of years before the first Highland chief ever drew a sword. The genome had preserved memories that history could not. This doesn't mean every ancient legend is literally true. DNA cannot identify a legendary warrior or prove that one specific hero fathered an entire clan. But it can reveal where populations came from, how they mixed, and how ancient communities evolved over thousands of years. When combined with archaeology and historical records, genetics paints a picture that is richer, deeper, and often far more surprising than legend alone. Today, we're exploring 10 Scottish surnames whose roots are closely connected to the ancient Highland populations that produced some of Scotland's most legendary warrior traditions. And as you'll soon discover, the story isn't simply about names. It's about survival. It's about identity. And it's about how the human genome quietly preserved a history that time almost erased. Let's begin. Number 10. Cameron. Few names are more closely associated with the Scottish Highlands than Cameron. For centuries, Clan Cameron dominated the rugged lands around Le Habor, a region surrounded by towering mountains, deep forests, and narrow glens that naturally favored warriors who knew every path and every ridge. The Camerons earned a reputation for courage, fierce independence, and loyalty that lasted through generations of conflict. Whether facing rival clans or standing against government armies, they became one of the symbols of Highland resistance. Traditional clan history traces their origins to medieval Gaelic chiefs. But DNA suggests the people living in this region carried much older ancestry. Genetic studies show that Western Highland communities retained unusually high levels of ancestry connected to ancient Celtic-speaking populations, while also preserving genetic markers inherited from people who settled Britain thousands of years earlier during the Neolithic and Bronze Age. Rather than descending from one single man, the Cameron surname gradually became the banner under which many local families united. That wasn't unusual. In the Highlands, clans functioned as political and military alliances. Families could join through loyalty, marriage, adoption, or protection. A clan name represented belonging more than direct biological descent. The result is something fascinating. Modern Camerons often share regional genetic patterns that connect them to ancient Western Scottish populations, yet they also display multiple paternal lineages. At first glance, that seems contradictory. In reality, it tells the story of a living community that grew stronger by bringing different families together under one identity. The warriors shared one banner. Their DNA preserved many histories. Number 9. MacLeod. The Isle of Mull rises dramatically from the Atlantic, its cliffs battered by relentless winds and crashing waves. For centuries, this island served as the heartland of Clan MacLeod, one of Scotland's most respected warrior clans. From castles overlooking the sea, MacLeod chiefs defended their territory against Norse raiders, rival clans, and powerful kingdoms seeking control of the Western Islands. Clan tradition speaks proudly of noble Gaelic ancestors. DNA tells an even older story. Ancient genetic evidence suggests the Hebrides have been continuously occupied for thousands of years by communities whose ancestry developed through repeated waves of migration. The first farmers who crossed into Britain. Bronze Age newcomers carrying new technologies. Celtic-speaking peoples who shaped the language and culture. Each left part of their genetic legacy behind. Instead of replacing earlier populations, these groups blended together over countless generations. That blending can still be detected today. Many people carrying the MacLeod surname possess genetic signatures common throughout Scotland's Western Islands rather than belonging to a single paternal ancestor. The clan itself became a bridge between history and prehistory. Its medieval warriors inherited a landscape whose human stories stretched back long before written records. And every generation unknowingly carried fragments of that forgotten past. Number 8. MacDonald. If there was ever a clan that embodied the power of the Highlands, it was Clan MacDonald. Known as the Lords of the Isles, the MacDonalds controlled vast territories across western Scotland for centuries. Their influence stretched from the mainland to the Hebrides, creating a maritime kingdom unlike anything else in medieval Britain. To friends, they were protectors. To enemies, they were unstoppable. Their origins have long been linked to MacLeod, the legendary 12th century war leader whose descendants established one of Scotland's greatest dynasties. But who was MacLeod himself? For decades, historians debated whether he was primarily Gaelic, Norse, or a combination of both. Modern genetic research has added an intriguing new dimension. Studies of descendants traditionally associated with Clan Donald reveal that while some paternal lines appear consistent with a common medieval ancestor, the wider clan reflects a remarkable mixture of Gaelic Highland ancestry and Norse influence. This shouldn't surprise us. For centuries, Scotland's western coast served as a meeting point between Celtic kingdoms and Viking settlers. Trade, warfare, alliances, and marriages created one of the most genetically diverse regions in Northern Europe. The MacDonalds emerged from that world, not as the descendants of one isolated people, but as heirs to centuries of cultural exchange. Their strength came not from purity. It came from adaptation. And perhaps that explains why they became one of the most powerful clans the Highlands had ever known. But if one clan symbolized power, another would come to symbolize ambition. And its story would challenge one of Scotland's oldest assumptions. The rise of Clan Campbell has often been described as one of the greatest success stories in Scottish history. From the rugged landscapes of Argyll, the Campbells expanded their influence until they became one of the most powerful clans in the Highlands. Through strategic marriages, political alliances, and military victories, they built an authority that rivaled even Scotland's greatest noble families. To many Highland clans, however, the Campbells became controversial figures. Some viewed them as loyal servants of the Scottish crown. Others remembered them as bitter rivals whose ambitions changed the balance of power forever. But beneath those political struggles lies a far older story. Modern DNA research shows that the people of Argyll carried ancestry shaped by thousands of years of migration across Western Britain. Long before medieval Scotland existed, this coastline connected Ireland, Scotland, and the islands between them. The sea was never a barrier. It was a highway. Ancient sailors crossed these waters carrying families, languages, technologies, and traditions that gradually blended into the population we now call the Gaels. Because of this, many Campbell descendants share genetic patterns found throughout Western Scotland and Ireland. Rather than proving a single founder, their DNA reflects centuries of movement across the Irish Sea. The clan became powerful during the Middle Ages. But the ancestry beneath it had already been evolving for millennia. That is one of the most remarkable lessons genetics continues to teach us. Sometimes the oldest stories are invisible, until the genome begins to speak. If stories like this fascinate you, don't forget to subscribe. Human history is far more interconnected than most of us were ever taught. Number 6. Fraser. The name Fraser is forever connected with the Highlands. From medieval castles to the tragic battles of the Jacobite era, the Frasers became symbols of courage, resilience, and unwavering loyalty. For centuries, historians debated where the family originally came from. Some believed they arrived from France after the Norman conquest. Others argued that they quickly became absorbed into Gaelic Highland society. DNA suggests the answer may be more complicated than either theory alone. While noble families often traced their lineage to continental Europe, the ordinary people who eventually became part of Clan Fraser largely belonged to long-established Highland populations. Over generations, Marriage, adoption, and military service transformed the clan into something much larger than one noble bloodline. The surname remained the same. The genetics became increasingly diverse. This pattern appears again and again across Scotland. Clan identity wasn't built only on biology. It was built on loyalty. And that loyalty created communities whose shared history became stronger than shared DNA alone. Ironically, genetics doesn't weaken the legend of the Frasers. It strengthens it, because it shows that clans survived by bringing people together instead of excluding them. That unity became their greatest weapon. Number 5. MacLeod. On the Isle of Skye, ancient castles still rise above dramatic cliffs overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. For nearly 800 years, Clan MacLeod has called this island home. Their history is deeply connected with the Vikings. Clan tradition traces its origins to Leod, a figure believed to have lived during the 13th century and whose ancestry may have included Norse settlers. For generations, these stories sounded almost mythical. Then genetics entered the conversation. Ancient DNA and historical evidence show that Viking expansion into Scotland left a lasting genetic legacy, especially across the Hebrides and the Northern Isles. But the results surprised researchers. Instead of replacing local populations, Norse settlers mixed extensively with existing Gaelic communities. Children inherited both worlds. Their language gradually became Gaelic. Their ancestry remained beautifully mixed. Many modern descendants connected to Western Island clans display evidence of both Celtic and Scandinavian heritage. The Highlands were never isolated. They were crossroads. Every ship that reached these shores carried more than cargo. It carried new families, new cultures, new DNA. The legendary Highland warrior wasn't simply Celtic, nor simply Viking. In many cases, he was both. Number 4. Mackenzie. The Mackenzies rose to prominence in the rugged Northwest Highlands, controlling vast territories where mountains disappeared into mist and sea locks carved deep into the landscape. Their influence expanded rapidly during the late medieval period. Yet the people living in these lands possessed roots that stretched much deeper into Scotland's past. Genetic research across the Northwest Highlands suggests these communities retained unusually strong continuity with earlier populations despite centuries of political upheaval. While armies marched, kings rose and fell, borders shifted, entire villages quietly preserved ancient genetic lineages that had existed for thousands of years. This continuity doesn't mean nothing changed. Far from it. New people continued arriving. Families continued intermarrying. Cultures continued evolving. But unlike many regions of Europe that experienced repeated large-scale population replacements, parts of the Highlands maintained remarkable genetic stability over long periods. The Mackenzie name eventually became attached to this ancient human landscape. A medieval surname, carried by descendants whose ancestry reached far beyond medieval history itself. By now, a pattern is beginning to emerge. These famous surnames aren't simply family names. They are windows into entire populations, communities, landscapes, and forgotten migrations. Yet the biggest surprises are still waiting, because the final 3 surnames reveal just how complicated Scotland's ancient past truly is. Number 3. MacGregor. Few Highland names carry as much legend as MacGregor. Their clan motto, S Ryagal Mo Dream, My Blood is Royal, reflected a belief that their ancestry reached back to some of Scotland's earliest Gaelic kings. Whether every part of that tradition is historically accurate remains a matter of debate, but there is no doubt that the MacGregors became one of the most resilient clans in Scottish history. For generations, they faced persecution unlike almost any other Highland family. After conflicts with rival clans and the Scottish crown, the MacGregor name was outlawed. Many families were forced to abandon their surname, adopting names like Murray, Drummond, Grant, or Campbell simply to survive. Yet names can disappear. DNA cannot. Modern genetic studies have shown that despite centuries of persecution, many Highland populations retained deep ancestral continuity. Families may have changed their surnames, but the ancient genetic landscape of the Highlands remained remarkably consistent. It is one of history's greatest ironies. Governments could outlaw a name. They could confiscate land. They could scatter a people across Scotland, but they could never erase the ancestry carried within every generation. The genome remembered what politics tried to forget. Number 2. Mackenzie of Seaforth and the wider Highland legacy. When scientists compare modern Scottish DNA with ancient genomes recovered from prehistoric Britain, they repeatedly encounter the same pattern. The Highlands were never the product of one migration, nor were they the descendants of one single ancient tribe. Instead, they represent thousands of years of human movement. Mesolithic hunter-gatherers arrived after the last ice age. Neolithic farmers introduced agriculture from continental Europe. Bronze Age migrations brought new technologies and new ancestry. Later came Celtic-speaking cultures, Norse settlers, Norman nobles, and countless local communities that gradually blended together. Every generation left something behind. Every generation inherited something older. This is why attempts to connect any single surname to one legendary warrior are far too simple. Real history is more extraordinary. A Highland surname represents layer upon layer of forgotten lives. Each generation adding another chapter. Each family preserving another fragment of Scotland's remarkable story. Number 1. MacDonald. No surname better symbolizes the spirit of the Highlands than MacDonald. As Lords of the Isles, the MacDonalds commanded fleets, ruled islands, negotiated with kings, and built one of the greatest Gaelic lordships ever seen in medieval Europe. Their influence reached from the western mainland to the Hebrides, shaping Scottish history for centuries. Yet even their story stretches beyond medieval politics. DNA reveals that the people who eventually became Clan Donald inherited ancestry shaped by countless generations living along Scotland's Atlantic coast. Some lineages show connections consistent with long-established Gaelic populations. Others reflect Scandinavian influence left behind by Viking settlement. Together, they formed something entirely unique. Not purely Gaelic, not purely Norse, but unmistakably Highland. And perhaps that is the greatest surprise of all. For centuries, people searched for one heroic ancestor, one legendary bloodline, one perfect origin. Science found something far richer. It found communities instead of individuals, shared ancestry instead of isolated families. A history written not by one warrior, but by thousands of ordinary men and women whose lives merged across centuries. Standing today among the mist-covered mountains of Glencoe, or beside the quiet waters of Loch Ness, or beneath the ruined walls of Donan Castle, it is easy to imagine that the Highlands have never changed. The wind still sweeps across the heather. Golden eagles still circle above the peaks. Ancient rivers continue carving their way through valleys older than memory itself. But beneath that timeless landscape lies a human story in constant motion. Families arrived. Others disappeared. Languages evolved. Kingdoms rose and fell. All the while, the genome quietly recorded every encounter, every migration, every marriage, every new beginning. History often tells us where people lived. Archaeology reveals what they built. But DNA tells us something even more profound. It reveals how people became connected. The Scottish Highlands were never isolated from the rest of the world. They were shaped by countless journeys across seas, mountains, and generations. The legendary Highland warrior was not the product of a single bloodline. He was the descendant of thousands of years of resilience, adaptation, and survival. That doesn't make the legend smaller. It makes them greater. Because the real story of Scotland is not one of purity. It is one of endurance. Of communities standing together through invasion, famine, political upheaval, and changing worlds. The clan names that still survive today are more than surnames. They are living echoes of ancient populations whose memories remain hidden inside every human genome. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson modern genetics has given us. The deeper scientists explore our DNA, the more they discover that human history was never simple. It was never divided into neat lines or perfect family trees. It was always layered, always connected, always evolving. And somewhere within that extraordinary tapestry of ancestry, the spirit of the Highlands still lives on, not as a single legendary warrior, but as millions of lives woven together across thousands of years. If you enjoyed this journey into Scotland's hidden genetic history, let me know in the comments which ancient civilization or legendary bloodline you'd like to explore next. Because the genome is still uncovering stories that history almost forgot. And this is only the beginning.